Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to today's meeting on Bill C-81, an act to ensure a barrier-free Canada. The objective of today's meeting is to continue the committee's thorough review of this bill. I'd like to take a moment to remind both those participating in the proceedings as well as those observing the proceedings of the committee in person and on video that the committee adopted a motion on September 18th, which included instructions for the clerk to explore options to allow for the full participation of all witnesses and members of the public on this study. As a result, the committee has made arrangements to make all meetings in relation to the study of Bill C-81 as accessible as possible in a variety of ways. This includes providing sign language interpretation and near real-time closed captioning in the room. Please note that both American Sign Language and Quebec Sign Language are being offered to those in our audience. For those who would like to watch the American Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my left. For those who would like to watch the Quebec Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my right. In addition, please note that the first two rows of benches have been reserved for those who wish to avail themselves of these interpretation services. Screens displaying the near real-time closed captioning have also been set up, with the English text again to my left and the French to my right. The sign language interpreters in the room are also being video recorded for the eventual broadcast of the meeting on Parleview via the committee's website. In light of these arrangements, the committee would like to ask that if you need to leave the room during the meeting, please do not walk in front of the sign language interpreters. Instead, please use the extremities of the room. In addition, we would ask that those in the room remain seated as much as possible during the meeting so that everyone in the audience can clearly see the sign language interpretation. Finally, if a member of the audience requires assistance at any time, please notify a member of the staff or the committee clerk. In addition, I would just like to add that we have found throughout these meetings at times witnesses and committee members alike will often speak at a pace that's a little too fast. I will be interrupting if the interpreters give me either a thumbs up or a thumbs down if we are going a bit fast. So I apologize in advance, but there's lots of time, and I have not been very heavy-handed with the stopwatch on this study. So please take your time and with either your opening remarks or answer questions and answers. I'd like to welcome this panel here today. First of all, from Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance, pleased to have Mr. David Lepofsky, Chair, and he's joined by Faith Camilletti, a student from Osgoode Hall Law School, and Connor Campbell, also a student from Osgoode Hall Law School. Welcome to all three of you. From the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association, we have Mr. Christopher Sutton, National Executive Director. Welcome, sir. And from CNIB Foundation, we have Angela Bonfanti, Vice President, Ontario and Quebec, and Robbie Weldon, Program Lead, Peer Support and Leisure. Thank you as well for being here today. Each group will receive 7-minute statements, and we're going to get started this morning with Mr. Lepofsky. The next 7 minutes are all yours, sir.
Good morning. Our society has for too many years, indeed decades, been designed on the ridiculous assumption that for the most part, it's there for people without disabilities. Not that people wanted us excluded, but we just have never been part of the thinking much of the time. When our buildings are built, our public transit is created, our workplaces are designed, the goods and services we use are found, designed, and sold. It's a ridiculous idea because over 5 million of us now have a disability. But even that number underestimates us. Because you see, every one of us in this room, every voter that voted for you or against you, either has a disability now or is bound to get one later in their life. We are the minority of everyone. And no politician, no political party can go soft on the minority of everyone. We commend the federal government for committing to bring forward Bill C-81 and for undertaking a good public consultation on it. However, the bill that is now before you is very strong on good intentions, but very weak on implementation and enforcement. The groups that have come before you have provided a roadmap of how to fix it, and that can be done. When you come to vote on amendments before this committee, when you go back to your caucuses to decide what position you're going to take, we urge you not simply to think of the immediate political expediency of today. We do urge you to think about the imminent election a year from now and the needs of the minority of everyone for whom no party or politician can go soft. But we urge you to think about what you would say to you 20 years from now if you don't already have a disability now, but you get one later. What would you come back in time and say about your reluctance to support strong amendments? We urge you to come together and unanimously support strong amendments. You've heard many groups focusing on very common themes. Our top priorities are in a brief which is being circulated to you in Braille, and a more detailed brief that you've got that spells much more out in detail. Let me use my time to focus on two that other groups have supported, but which have not been discussed as much at this committee. First, this bill wrongly splinters the creation of accessibility standards and their enforcement among multiple federal agencies. This is a formula for a weak bill. Please unsplinter it. This bill provides that accessibility standards can be enacted, and that's good, but it divides the power to make them among the federal cabinet, who should have all that power, and then the Canadian Transportation Agency for transportation providers, and the CRTC for broadcasters and telecom companies. That is a formula for confusion, contradiction, delay, and weak standards. All standards should be made by one body alone, and that is the politically accountable federal cabinet. Giving the power over public transit to the Canadian Transportation Agency will have the effect of weakening the measures you take on transportation. That agency, like the CRTC, has no demonstrated expertise on accessibility for people with disabilities. Moreover, both the CTA and the CRTC have substantially inadequate track records in the use of the power they've had for years on accessibility. If you go to folks who've got a bad track record, you've got a predictable future of more bad track record. Let me give you one example that says it all. The Canadian Transportation Agency has had a power to make accessibility standards for people with disabilities in federally regulated transit providers, transportation providers, for over 3 decades. They're so excited and so eager to use that power that they've made absolutely none. So giving them that power now can give us no enthusiasm that they'll be any more willing to use it and to use it well in the future. Moreover, you might think I'd be upset that they haven't used it, but in fact, I'm happy they haven't used it, because the legislation now, and as this bill is written, the legislation in the future would provide that if they make a federal accessibility standard, it can actually cut back on the rights that the legislation now provides. Because once a regulation is made, it is fully dispositive of the right to accommodation under the transportation legislation. That is really bad. We need you to first remove that feature in the Transportation Act so that a standard, if enacted, can only extend our rights and never cut them back. And second, concentrate all power to make accessibility standards in the federal cabinet. As well, this bill splinters the power to enforce this legislation among 4 federal organizations, the Accessibility Commissioner, the CTA, the CRTC, and the tribunal that regulates federal employment. Again, a formula for confusion. Now, the federal government to date has responded to this with an inadequate response. It simply said, oh, we'll have a policy that there will be no wrong door. Whichever agency you go to, no matter how confusing it is to figure it out, and believe me, it is, no matter how confusing it is, you go in the wrong door, we'll send you to the right door. Problem solved. No, it isn't. Because all that does is fix the problem of which door you go in. It does not solve the substantial problem that happens once you're inside that door. That 4 agencies, that means we've got to lobby 4 of them to get them up to the level of expertise needed to deal with this. That means we've got to learn 4 different sets of procedures because they all may use different procedures once you get inside the door. That means we've got to go to agencies that may not have any expertise in disability and accessibility. It makes far more sense to simply mandate the new accessibility commissioner with all accessibility enforcement under this act. The fact is simply this. The design of this bill, splintering among these agencies, serves only 2 interests. The bureaucracies that want to preserve their turf, and those obligated organizations that would rather this law have weaker standards, slower implementation, and weaker enforcement. That is not consistent with the federal government's commendable motivations and intentions under this legislation. Let me conclude by turning to one other point we'd like to emphasize. Members of this committee has asked what could be done to ensure that on day 1, this law will make a real difference. Here's the answer, and it's not now in this bill. This bill should be amended in accordance with our proposals in our brief to ensure that whenever federal money is spent, it can never be used to create a new barrier or perpetuate an old barrier against people with disabilities. Now, it's commendable that the bill allows the making of access standards for federal procurement of goods and services, but that's not the only way the federal government spends money. The federal government right now spends a lot of money on infrastructure, not only federal infrastructure, but money transferred to communities or provinces for local projects, public transit, hospitals, and so on. We urge that any federal spending on procurement, on infrastructure, on loans or grants to business or otherwise, that any of that money be have strong accessibility strings attached, monitored, and enforced so that federal money is never used to make things worse for us. On day 1, that could start making a difference. In conclusion, I've a real strong sense of personal history today because 38 years ago, when the Charter of Rights was only a proposal, it did not include equality for people with disabilities. And I had the privilege of being one of the many people that came here to argue that the Charter be amended to include equality for people with disabilities. Working together, we succeeded then. Working together now, we can succeed to make this bill, which is strong on intention but weak on enforcement and implementation. We now have the opportunity to again work together with you to create a strong law that will make The victory of 38 years ago, equality for people with disabilities, not only a legal guarantee, but a reality in the lives of all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Now from the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association, Christopher Sutton, National Executive Director. 7 minutes, sir.
Good morning, and thank you for the honor of inviting the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association here as you learn more about Bill C-81. The Canadian Hard of Hearing Association was established in 1982 and is a leading consumer advocacy organization representing the needs of nearly 4 million Canadians with hearing loss. With a network from coast to coast to coast, we work cooperatively with professionals, service providers, government, and others to provide life-enhancing information, support, and advocacy to ensure people with hearing loss can overcome barriers in all aspects of their lives. My name is Christopher Sutton. I'm the National Executive Director of the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association. Like most of my colleagues here before you today, I've had the privilege to work on behalf of people with disabilities and have worked in a corporate, not-for-profit, and government sectors. Even with my advanced level of education and professional success, as a person who lives with an invisible disability, I live with barriers on a daily basis. The Canadian Hard of Hearing Association supports Bill C-81. While we acknowledge that laws and standards are only one part of breaking down barriers, we see this as a positive step towards ensuring that everyone can live in a barrier-free society. As an individual who has lived in the United States, where they have the Americans with Disabilities Act, I am hopeful what this legislation will accomplish. The Canadian Hard of Hearing Association congratulates the Government of Canada for its work on developing this legislation and the process in which they undertook to consult with people with disabilities to ensure this legislation meets our needs. Our organization was a partner in this consultation process and continues our work through our engagement with the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance. We are pleased to see that so many of our recommendations we provided are included in this critical legislation. There are some areas in which we see there could be improvements to ensure this legislation is the best possible and allows Canada to lead globally in making sure we live in a barrier-free society. As one of the partner organizations working with the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance, we support the recommendations that were provided to this committee and would like to stress on the following recommendations. First, timelines for achieving a barrier-free Canada. Similar to those used in Ontario with the AODA, with a goal of having a barrier-free Ontario by 2025, build specific timelines and deadlines in the legislation so that people have a vision and a goal to work towards something. We know a barrier-free society will not happen overnight, but if we have a vision and a commitment, that's critical. Specific timelines and deadlines must be created for establishing the infrastructure to implement the Act. It also needs to be created for the Accessibility Standards Development Organization, the Standards and Regulation Committees, with the Chief Accessibility Officer in their office, and the Accessibility Commissioner in their office. We also need to make sure that we set timelines and deadlines for setting and implementing these standards and regulations, and importantly, the progress reports. The second recommendation that we stress is access to communication, accommodations, and supports. While most people think of accommodations and supports being access to a building with a ramp and so forth, it's much more than that. And understanding a fully accessible built environment is very important. We strongly encourage the use of adoption of innovative solutions that provide access to communication, accommodations, and support. These communication accommodations include things such as cart and captioning, ensuring that service counters, conference rooms, and other facilities are looped with assistive technology such as loops, FM systems, and so forth for those with hearing assistive devices, text communication, sign language, and other forms of support. Communication and supports must be mandatory about standards and regulations. Thirdly, funding. Funding must be made available so that people with disabilities and the organizations that work to represent them are properly compensated for their contributions to the design and implementation of this legislation. Too often, people with disabilities are asked for expertise and our lived experience, yet we have no financial compensation for this. Funding is also needed to develop toolkits, guidelines, training, education programs, and other things to ensure the successful implementation of this legislation. Also, very critical, additional funds need to be provided to organizations like my own that work on behalf of people with disabilities so that we can continue to resource these individuals so they can learn more about their disabilities and how to live a barrier-free life. And probably one of the most important things as well is creating a culture of inclusion and equity. All people employed by the federal public sector, including staff, must engage in intensive education programs to ensure they understand and demonstrate inclusive attitudes. It's important that we show at all levels that accessibility is critical. All employees should be examples and role models for creating a culture of inclusion and equity. We must develop policies and practice that must be set and followed that change attitudes. But also critical, we need to have people with disabilities at all aspects and all levels of employment. People with disabilities need to be present and they need to be seen so that we're a part of this change. While I'm here to address disability issues as a whole and not specific to hearing loss, I do want to bring your attention to the rising number of people with hearing loss and the associated economic burden that poses a problem for Canada and globally. Hearing loss has rarely been an issue that captures public support, and while some strategies for hearing healthcare have been implemented in some provinces, awareness and resources allocations for hearing healthcare remain scarce. This is concerning, and unaddressing hearing loss puts affected Canadians at significant risk for unemployment and develop other serious conditions such as depression, anxieties that add further costs to our healthcare system. You may be already aware, last week I provided you and your office with an invitation to have an opportunity to address these issues in a separate conversation, and I look forward to receiving your response. The Canadian Hard of Hearing Association is committed to continuing its work with this committee and the government as they develop this legislation to ensure that it meets the needs of all people with disabilities. I thank you again, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, sir. And now from CNIB Foundation, Angela Bonfanti, Vice President, Ontario and Quebec, and Robbie Weldon, Program Lead, Peer Sport and Leisure. 7 minutes, please.
Excellent, thank you. Good morning, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for giving CNIB an opportunity to speak here today. As you mentioned, I'm joined here by my colleague, Robbie Weldon, who is our Program Lead for Peer Support and Leisure for Eastern Ontario, and she'll be sharing this presentation with me today. I'd like to start off with a brief overview of CNIB's history and I think why we're here today. We were founded in 1918, just celebrated our 100th anniversary, founded by wounded war veterans coming back and looking for help for those who lost significant sight through their journey serving Canada in the war. And throughout the last 100 years, CNIB has done a number of things that have helped to fill gaps that are around societal inequities that people with sight loss face every day. Employment being the one that we have tried and tried again and have yet to succeed on. We believe that a piece to this puzzle is really around the accessibility of our procedures, of our legislation, of our buildings, and to Christopher's point, not just the bricks and mortar and the physical space. But I think that our presentation here today will focus on what we mean by when we say accessible and what this means for people with sight loss. So today, CNIB's mission is to have a bolder, brighter future. We are an advocacy-based organization that is here to boost engagement in the world of work, to unleash the power of technology, and to drive achievement and equality for this next century of work that we're going to be in. I'm going to turn it over to Robbie now to present her portion of the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Robbie Weldon, and as an employee of CNIB, I also am a person with sight loss since the age of 15. Four-time Paralympic athlete, mother of 2 children, racing 95 kilometers an hour down hills on the tandem. My biggest fear is crossing the street each day to catch the bus to work. as spoken, physical barriers are a large part of the barriers that persons with blindness or partial sight face on a daily basis. But stronger than that are the access to information and the attitudinal barriers. As a person with sight loss myself, I don't use a guide dog and often don't use a cane. So it's invisible disability, and having to explain or explain myself to persons in service industry. An example, coming back from a World Cup in May to the Pearson International Airport, coming through customs and using the accessibility lane, approaching the fellow that's in customs, the worker, and him reprimanding me for being in the accessible lane, even though identifying that I had vision loss. Those types of attitudinal barriers, we're here today to really promote that. Beyond legislation, there's a great deal of funding required to educate and bring awareness to Canadians at all levels about the importance of changing those attitudes and removing barriers on an ongoing basis, whether they be physical or, like I said, access to information, attitudinal barriers. Thank you.
And so we at CNIB applaud the federal government for this legislation. We've been part of this consultative process since 2016, whether it be through a government consultation, public town halls, thematic roundtables, the Prime Minister's Youth Forum, and an online survey. CNIB was also part of 2 disability consultative groups funded by the federal government to consult with Canadians with disabilities from coast to coast to coast. After Bill C-81 was tabled this June, CNIB analyzed the legislation, and we conducted our own nationwide survey with people who have sight loss and sight loss advocates on the legislation. Our recommendations and testimony today are based on what we heard over the past 3 years and also based on our experience over the last 100 years. As my colleague Robbie has started to indicate, CNIB believes that substantial amendments are needed to strengthen Bill C-81. We agree with many of the recommendations that other disability organizations have brought forward. We would like to highlight a few recommendations we believe are key to a truly barrier-free Canada. We agree with the need to create a new Accessibility Commissioner and a Chief Accessibility Officer. As David Lepofsky has mentioned, there is a fear amongst Canadians with sight loss that a splintering effect will make enforcement and compliance of this legislation, future regulations and standards, more onerous for Canadians with disabilities. We advise against further creation of bureaucratic processes and fear that bottleneck, as it has in the past, may occur when the Office of the Chief Accessibility Officer is up and running. We have many years of experience advising on making structure more accessible and straightforward, and would urge the government to consult with us when these new offices are being set up. We believe that in order to create a society free of barriers, that products and goods that are accessed by tax-paying Canadians should be accessible for all. That is why CNIB urges the scope of Bill C-81 to be broadened to require the federal government to procure materials, technologies, and services. This will help to facilitate a shift also in the private sector that will want to do business with the federal government and hopefully, by extension, do better business themselves. Many procured materials are frankly inaccessible. If the government creates a procurement strategy with accessibility in mind, everyone will have to benefit. As Minister Qualtrough currently has ministerial oversight regarding this legislation and Canada's procurement strategy, she is in a prime position to ensure barriers are removed. For example, point-of-sale terminals are often inaccessible for persons with sight loss and other disabilities. They have to ask a stranger to indicate whether they've put in the right PIN. They have to give a stranger their personal financial information to ensure that their groceries are bought and paid for. If the government, for example, procured a point-of-sale terminal that was accessible and mandated that all point-of-sale terminals used by the federal government, such as those used at Canada Post, were accessible, this could greatly shift the use of point-of-sale terminals that non-federally regulated entities utilize. The world is changing quickly. New technologies are being created daily, and old practices are being modernized. Organizations and companies are changing the way business is done. People can print wirelessly. Documents are now saved on the cloud, instead on wired networks and filing cabinets. I hold my hand a smartphone, something many federal organizations already pay for their staff. Robbie and I use the same piece of technology to help us get our job done. This is through the use of artificial intelligence and other applications that are built into this device. It's not the only solution, but it is a solution that is economical and frankly something that's already being done. Finally, if the federal government wants a society without barriers, then all future legislation, policy, regulations, and funding should be reviewed with a disability lens. Nothing for us without us. This is consistent with the federal government's Gender-Based Analysis Plus, which was done in the past few budgets. As Canadians get older and live older, they are more likely to develop a disability. The government's policies, legislation, and regulations should not perpetuate further barriers. The sight loss population unemployment rate is 3 times the size of the national average. We believe that this could be key in helping us to finally close that gap in employment. With the amendments stated today, as well as others you have heard from the disability community, Bill C-81 can be a strong piece of legislation and ultimately create an accessible Canada. We thank the committee for inviting CNIB to appear before you, and we look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. We're going to get started right away with questions. And first up, we have MP Finley, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lepofsky, I'd like to thank you for your very eloquent and impassioned speech. I found it enlightening and very motivating. One of the concerns that I have with this particular bill is the differences between how federally regulated departments or agencies are treated and how the private sector that is under federal regulation will be treated in terms of their accountability, exemptions, and enforcement. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that, please.
We think there should be one regime for enforcement for everybody. It makes it easier, it makes it fair, it makes it cheaper, it makes it work. We also propose and recognize that in the design of any accessibility standard, you don't set one-size-fits-all rules. The requirements and the timelines will vary depending on the size and capacity of the organization. That's an accepted requirement for designing an accessibility standard, and that can be done under this Act. But it is rendered far more complicated when it depends on who you are and which agency you are and what kind of work you're doing, which will dictate which rules you've got to comply with and what timelines and who you go to for enforcement. So the best way to achieve what you are talking about is a uniform set of or process for enforcement under the Accessibility Commissioner, not splintered, and is a one body that sets all accessibility standards, and that's the federal cabinet. The way this bill is designed right now, believe it or not, it's not the cabinet that gets the final say when it comes to transportation barriers. It's the CTA, because if the CTA doesn't propose the standard or adopt it, cabinet can't approve it. Now, why should the CTA have a veto over cabinet? Last time I checked, we vote for parties that form the cabinet. We don't vote for the CTA.
Thank you. One of the parts of this bill talks about having, after 3 years of consultation to get this far, even several more years of consultation to determine the standards that should be applied. We had the Canadian Council for Disabilities here. They say they already have standards. Via Rail consulted them when they were planning their renovations and remodeling and retrofits. Around the world, different places have brought in standards to varying degrees of success. Do you believe that another several years are required, or do the standards already exist the ones that are needed?
I know your
Also,
party has raised concerns about this, and respectfully, we don't agree. Let me explain why, and I urge you to reconsider your concern. There should be timelines for action so that consultations don't go on forever. But on the other hand, we do not have in Canada any good accessibility standards in the major areas we're discussing. We have building codes, but respectfully, when it comes to accessibility, they're all somewhere between lousy and close to lousy. They're up to date as of maybe early the last century. You build a building that complies with the Ontario Building Code, and you can readily be creating barriers in that building. We've released videos that have gone viral documenting this in brand new buildings using public money. So, and the same when it comes to any number of other areas. The standards in Ontario, and my coalition's been in the lead lobbying on these, are in all cases helpful, but woefully inadequate. There are some areas internationally where there are standards that can be learned from and adopted, but we do need a process here where we look at what's been done here or elsewhere, decide where they're helpful and replicate that, decide where they're too weak and do better. And you can't do that at the drop of a hat. That doesn't mean doing it for ridiculously long timelines, but we need to take the time to get it right. So I know there's been some criticism that this bill is just mandating a bunch of new consultations. I think that, in fairness, overstates the case. That we can't, it's not just that the standards are out there, let's just copy and paste them and they're ready to go. Too often that's just not the case.
Are there any jurisdictions in particular or authorities that you would recommend be consulted in this process?
The two places I know where they are the furthest ahead in certain respects are the U.S. for certain, and in some areas, the State of Israel. Now, we haven't surveyed all around the world to be in a position to give you a comprehensive review, but I know that in Israel, they've put in stronger requirements than has Ontario, and they have more enforcement officials in the tiny state of Israel, with a few other problems on their plate, than in the entire province of Ontario for accessibility.
I'll pass.
And up next, we have Bobby Morrissey, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to follow up with Mr. Lepofsky on the discussion you were just having, and you made the comment this focus should be on timelines for action. So I'm interpreting your answer, correct me if I'm wrong, is simply putting timelines in place to achieve may not get what you want. The bill should focus on implementing accessibility target timelines. Could you just expand on your position or your statement of timelines for action?
Certainly, thank you. Timelines are needed in two contexts. First, the bill is lacking an ultimate deadline for achieving full accessibility. You've heard from many groups that have said we need that, and I don't know if you've heard from any groups that say we don't. The only person who's come before this committee, I believe, to make a case against doing that, and I may have got it wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, is Minister Qualtrough, who may have said, or someone may have said, I could be wrong, that, well, we don't have a timeline in the criminal code to be crime-free. Well, it's a wrong comparison. We have a criminal code because we know that, unfortunately, in our society, there will always be violence and so on, and we need laws to protect us when that happens. On the other hand, when it comes to accessibility, we can achieve full accessibility by a deadline if we set the deadline. We do have a society now where we've managed to ensure that we have women's washrooms in public buildings. We don't have to even think about that anymore. Marie Butriani, who wrote Ontario's accessibility law, and you heard from yesterday, talked about in the design of Ontario's law, the idea of an end deadline was hers and her government's, not ours. And they were very clever in doing that. It was a great move. She said, we're doing this so that we reach a point where we could think about accessibility in our environment for people with disabilities the way we think about women's washrooms. It just happens. We don't even have to think about it anymore. So that's the first thing. We need an end deadline. Without it, progress will be slower. While progress in Ontario hasn't been fast enough, the end deadline has played a very important role in any progress we've made. So if this bill has an end deadline, it will be stronger. If it doesn't, it's basically telling people with disabilities, we'd like accessibility, but don't expect it ever. Maybe some progress, but the end world of a world you can fully participate in, we're not even prepared to say when or if that'll ever really happen. The other deadlines that need to be built in are concrete deadlines by which various implementation measures in the bill must be taken by government. When standards must be made by, when public agencies and officials like the Accessibility Standards Development Organization must be established, those kind of timelines, because what we know about government, and this is regardless of party, what we know about government, and we've learned in Ontario, in Manitoba, and elsewhere where legislation exists, is that unless there are timelines by which public servants must take certain actions to get the bill up and running and take the measures it requires, they will fall behind. Not because they're bad people, but because they got competing pressures. Put simply, folks, you guys are in the political biz, and in the political biz, your timeline is usually the crisis of next week, and the distant future for you is next year's election. And beyond that, it's really out of the spectrum of what people even think about. We need legislative timelines that go beyond that, and a process to implement it. So, as in the case of Ontario, if the government fails to meet one of those deadlines, there's a place we can go and an order we could get to get the measure taken that they were obliged to take.
I'd be interested to briefly hear your comment about a concern was heard from some of the stakeholders is that deadline to make Canada fully accessible. So should the goal continue to be to focus, to always strive to achieve a more accessible Canada, or to achieve a static accessibility goal?
It's never static, but setting a goal of more accessibility is basically telling us that tokenism works. Not that that's what you mean. Because a goal of making Canada more accessible, well, put in one ramp in Vancouver and fix one inaccessible website in Halifax, and you've made Canada more accessible. That's all you got to do, and then you can celebrate that we achieved what we set out to do in this bill. That's not what the government means. They are aiming for a lot more. They've said it, and commend them for their intentions. But so what this means is you need to say the goal of full accessibility is set by a certain timeline. What that does is it tells, whatever the deadline is in Ontario, it was 20 years out, that told organizations, municipalities, in the case of the federal government, it would tell Bell Canada, Rogers, Air Canada, Canada Post, and the others that you regulate, it would tell them, okay, folks, the clock's ticking now. So go back and start making your plans for how you're going to get there on time. And the government will be telling itself the same thing. It will also enable us to measure progress, because when we're halfway through that timeline, we can say, are we halfway to that goal? And if we're not, then those in your seats will be able to face the call from the community to say we're behind schedule or we're ahead of schedule. Changes need to be made.
Thank you. Sorry. MP Hardcastle for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank everyone for their thought-provoking comments today, and I'm going to try and get us to talk about some of the things that haven't been mentioned. I know there are recurring themes, but we need to explore more fully how we can practically apply amendments and be confident in a consensus about certain amendments. Yesterday, we heard a little bit about the lack of a mention of a national building code in this legislation. And today we're hearing a little bit about the responsibility of an accessibility commissioner and a chief accessibility officer. And so maybe just talk a little bit about what you think the roles are and how we should be articulating standards and whose responsibility or who should be overseeing that ultimately, which office.
expecting that to all of us.
In general, whoever wants to go, I know Mr. Lipovsky, you've always got a lot just on the tip of your tongue, I think, so don't hold back.
Let me offer to you in a couple sentences that my colleagues can add in. All enforcement should be under the Accessibility Commissioner, pure and simple. Right now, the way the enforcement works, this is a specialty of mine, and I teach law, and I'm having trouble figuring this bill out. So I got to figure that other people are going to likely have similar difficulties. Making of accessibility standards, they should all be recommended by the CASDO, the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization. That's the way the government designed it, and that's right. But they should all then be enacted by one body, and that's Cabinet. The bill doesn't say that. That's wrong. There is a Chief Accessibility Officer. Their mandate's confusing, and we've provided in our brief a way to clarify it. Their role really should be as a national watchdog to keep us all on topic and on schedule. They should be issuing reports and recommendations to all of us, not pre-vetted by any minister. And they should be doing so to let us know when we're doing well, but also where we got to do more.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I would just add to that. It's Angela Bonfanti. I agree. I think that the CASDO is a great element of the bill, and that's what our survey told us when we surveyed thousands of people with sight loss after the bill was introduced. I also think that it's really important that we have a group of people with disabilities that are part of this process, especially when we start talking about those who want to put forward exemptions and other pieces which will inevitably happen. So I think that the body is right, and we are in total agreement with David on this, but we need to have a group of people that have the lived experience that are at the deciding table.
That just gets me back to the issue of exemptions. Where do you think that we should be going in terms of pushing for amendments for this bill? If amendments are a reality, should we be asking for an appeal process and that reasons be provided, or should we just get rid of that entirely? Mr. Lipovsky?
I think that the first step should be that the sweeping exemptions in this bill, where the government can give itself exemptions, where CTA can be giving out exemptions to transit providers, it's all wrong. It's all wrong. There are no exemptions from human rights, much less ones done behind closed doors with no input. The government said this bill is to be based on nothing about us without us. This is about taking it all away from us without us. And that shouldn't happen. If there are to be any exemption powers, if the concern is that there should be exemptions related to small businesses or something, and for the most part, the federal government doesn't regulate small business. Air Canada, Bell Canada are not small businesses. Then create an exemption power for small businesses. And if exemptions are to be granted, the bill should explain what the criteria are, and they should be time limited. And they should not be extended. They certainly shouldn't be extended if there's any showing that the company that gets the exemption has got accessibility problems. The way it's written now, the government could give a carte blanche exemption forever to an organization, and the day after, the same organization could set about creating all sorts of new barriers, and we have no recourse in relation to the exemption. So the bill doesn't make any sense now. If there's to be any exemption power at all, it should be tiny, narrowed, time limited. It should be subject to an appeal process, and there should be strict, narrow criteria about when the government can grant exemptions.
Thank you. And very quickly, can you comment on the way that we should be bringing timelines into force? I know that with the UN treaties, we use the concept of progressive realization. We don't have any coming into force provisions here either. Can you expand on how we can be using that more effectively for this bill?
Very, very briefly, please.
Our brief, the AODA Alliance brief, and the Arch Disability Law Center brief give you specifics on which provisions need to be amended to include specific timelines.
Thank you. MP Hogue, please.
Thank you again to all of the witnesses. As we've gone through a number of hearings, we've heard a number of issues come forward. I think there are 2 or 3 principles that seem to be coming up consistently. Firstly, everyone thinks that it's wonderful that this initiative has been taken. The concerns are expressed around implementation, accountability, and the principles that are inherent within those in terms of they become operationalized, and issues around funding, culture, procurement, accessibility. Certainly the principle that the minister talked about from the beginning was wanting to have an approach that was not about disability, but about openness and inclusive society, and those are the directions that some of the principles that are driving us. Mr. Lipinski, you've talked a little bit about the timelines and how there would be some time-limited exemptions granted. Do you see those exemptions being for a whole field of organizations, or do you see those being individual organizations? How, in fact, would that be operationalized? I like the principle, but I'm not sure how that becomes operational in a meaningful way.
Okay, I'm not sure. Let me begin by saying we don't really see the case for needing it. It's the government that came forward with it, so our answer is if you're going to do it at all, do it subject to the restraints that we mentioned. But here's why we don't think you need it. When you design an access standard, when you say to an organization, here's what you got to do, it's not a one-size-fits-all standard. It can set different timelines for taking action depending on whether you're public sector or private sector, whether you're bigger or smaller. And so the flexibility can be designed in based on the costs and the abilities of the obligated organizations. Properly designed standards build those in. And they've done it in Ontario, and if anything, the timelines have been too long. In other words, they've given obligated organizations more time than they need to. It's certainly never been a case where they've been making them rush into action sooner. So that's where the flexibility gets built in anyway. I know some members at this committee have said at the hearings, what's the cost of doing this? Well, the cost of taking these actions is already required under the Human Rights Code. This bill doesn't actually impose new obligations. It should codify the obligations that have been on the books under the Charter and the Canadian Human Rights Act for decades. But recognizing that some organizations can do more sooner because they've got more resources and more capacity, you build that into the standards. And you don't need to then turn around and create exemptions that essentially double count and double credit that situation.
So if I'm an organization or I have a small business somewhere in a rural part of Manitoba, and I'm not meeting those standards, are you suggesting we grant exemptions to small organizations, or is it to the whole business community? How do you break that down into an operational
Well, first, we
model?
wouldn't grant any exemptions to an entire sector of the economy. That wouldn't make any sense. You build into the standard different requirements based on size of organization and resource or capacity of the organization. The Human Rights Code's written exactly that way. So is the Charter of Rights.
So an individual organization would be included or given an exemption because it was part of an area, or would I have to change my hardware and say individually I have to apply to you?
I'm going to turn it around and say it's the government side that's asking for the exemption power. So I'd say design it, if you're going to have one at all, that we don't see the need for it, make it as narrow as possible. If the motivation behind the government wanting to create an exemption power is concern about small business, create a power that says exemptions can be granted, but only to organizations of this size, based on capacity, based on an application and a request, time limited, based on the following criteria. In other words, do you follow me? In other words, if that's the worry, and I can't tell you that's the worry because we're not the one espousing it. What the government's done here is said, well, the bill gives the power to grant exemption to anybody, anytime, for any reason.
David, I'd like to weigh in on this, if that's okay. I think that if there is, federally regulated, there should be no exemptions. That's our stance completely. Where there are exemptions outside of that, we need to have a published, online, and accessible format, very transparent way for someone to put forward a request for exemption. This alleviates the backdoor conversations and the smaller routes that somebody can take that often happens when there's bureaucracy. So I think make it public, make it accessible, and give it a timeline.
Given that statement, can you describe for me how you might grant exemptions, what the criteria, culture, organization you might grant an exemption to? Can you
I
describe
think it
some of
would
those?
be organization or sector, because I think even under the small business area, the revenue levels vary, the debt levels vary. I think we have to be smarter about the criteria and that it's not a blanket approach. So if I'm a small business in Manitoba and I'm running a small restaurant with 20 seats and I'm running at a deficit, and there should be a criteria that again is online where I fall within that category where I need an exemption for now, not forever, and that I have a plan in place to become compliant under the Act.
So there's a firm deadline, and then you're suggesting that people can apply within that if they don't, to extend that deadline for particular circumstances.
Not forever. There's
And
improvements
those are the types
everywhere.
of circumstances you would see.
And let me just give you another example of where
Okay,
things
I will.
go wrong.
Very
And I
briefly,
think
sir.
maybe Ms. Young or someone, I've read these debates, and forgive me, but my ears glaze over after a while.
You
Please
should
don't
try
take
sitting
that,
on this side for a while.
but don't take that personally. The one question that was raised from someone was, oh, well, we should grant exemptions if people are already in compliance. Well, if they're in compliance, they don't need an exemption. Or we should grant exemptions so they comply with provincial access standards. Well, if the provincial access standards are too weak, as is the case in Ontario, that's no basis for an exemption at all.
Thank you.
So this has to be much more narrowly tailored.
Thank you
if
very
it's going to
much.
happen at all.
And MP Rumi, you're going to have about 4 minutes.
Thank you. Just picking up off of my colleague's statement. So, if we're a bank, for instance, and you wanted to test new equipment, or you're developing new equipment, would that be a reason to have an exemption while you're testing that equipment?
No. And I'll tell you why. Number one, the access standard should have built into it the kind of flexibility to address that. So if the access standard for automatic teller machines says you need equipment that will accomplish the following outcomes, A, B, and C, then if they're testing something new, then either it should meet those requirements or an existing ATM that already meets those requirements should be sitting there, and we, the user, have the choice to try one or the other. You don't tell people with disabilities, well, we're trying out new steps, so until we finish trying out the new steps, no ramp. It just doesn't make any sense. So yes, there should be room for experimentation and innovation, but not at the price of accessibility in the interim. So as long as there's accessibility in the interim, go experiment with anything new. And moreover, if you design the standards right, your question won't need to be asked. Because,
Thank you.
Because the outcomes are what the standard might require. A machine that will enable me to do A, B, and C without seeing or hearing or reading text.
Thank you. So, coming back to timelines, and it's nice to see you back here. You're in my copyright committee last week. I think it was last week. And we're doing the 5-year legislative review of copyright, and we specifically wanted to include a portion of disability to make sure that if there's any amendments to copyright law, that we could apply it to your community. And that's kind of eye-opening for a lot of people, and I heard your testimonies there. When we're talking about timelines, I'm just trying to wrap this all together. I don't have a lot of time. What we're hearing is an evolution of where we want to get to, right? There's no one thing that says, hey, we're there, yay, we're done. It's a process to get to where we want to go. And I just want to, I received an email from a constituent yesterday, and she says, as a person with multiple chemical sensitivities and hyper-electrosensitivity, finds it difficult and painful to enter all public places, including government and medical offices and hospitals, because of the use of chemicals, chemically scented products, and wireless technologies, including Wi-Fi. This could be considered disability. How does even one include that? Because when you're talking about, folks who can't hear, folks who can't see, I mean, those are things that we know, people in wheelchairs that we know, but this takes it to a different level. And how I see this, you can't put a timeline on that. I can see timelines on, when bodies are going to come together, how long is it going to take for certain standards to be developed, but it's an ongoing process. So can any of you speak to that?
Sure. the timelines as standards unfold, as I understand your question, what you're really saying is we can set timelines for taking actions like when to start enforcing and when to have agencies set up and when to make standards, but you're questioning whether we can have an end date.
Yes.
We got one in Ontario. What you've just talked about didn't hold us back and hasn't held that timeline from creating pressure on organizations, positive pressure, to sit down and say, how are we going to get there? Let's get to work on it. No, it's not indefinite. 2025 is getting closer. It hasn't stopped us from being able to turn to the government and say, you're behind schedule. Here are the things you need to do.
And just to push back on that, we heard yesterday from the Manitoba, who had a 10-year deadline, and they're very disappointed with where they're at the five-year mark. So, I mean, these are the challenges that you face when you implement a drop-dead timeline. And that's the challenge that we as a committee are faced with.
But just to understand, we share Barrier Free Manitoba's concern about the progress in Ontario, but the solution to that is not to take away the very powerful tool we have. The solution is saying they're going too slow is don't create a yardstick to measure slow by. The solution is to turn to the government and say, as we are in Ontario and as they are in Manitoba, you're not on schedule. Get to work. Now, what we need are tools that require the government not only to have that end timeline, but intermediate timelines that are more effective, that will more effectively keep us on schedule.
Agreed.
So the solution to your problem is not, hey, let's not have an end date because we might not make it. The solution is create the end date that's doable, not that's next week, but not that's a millennium from now, and then implement intermediate timelines that are designed to make sure we're on schedule.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and I'm going to have to step in and wrap this panel up. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today and contributing to the study of this bill. And we will suspend for a few moments while we set up the next panel. So we'll be back just in a few minutes, guys. Thank you. Suspend. Hey, Wayne, do you want to tap them on the shoulder? Yeah, get them in their seats. I'm gonna hit the gavel, but I'm not coming back, okay? Can you just let them know I'm just trying to get everyone's attention? Weird, but okay. If we could come back to order, please.
Do you want to start the meeting or not?
Yep.
We're starting now?
Yeah, I'm just waiting everyone to sit down on the seats. Okay, we'll come back here. All right, welcome to our next panel. We have joining us today from the Canadian Association of the Deaf, Frank Foligno, President, and James Roots, Executive Director. Welcome to both of you for being here today. Thank you for being here today. Also coming to us via video conference from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, we have from the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, David Arnott, Chief Commissioner. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, thanks.
Fantastic.
Good morning.
Excellent. Good morning. And thank you very much for joining us on what would be a very early hour for you this morning. We're going to start off with the Canadian Association of the Deaf, Frank Foligno and James Roots. The next 7 minutes are all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting us to appear before this committee to study Bill C-81, Accessible Canada Act. My name is Frank Foligno, and I'm the president of the Canadian Association of the Deaf, and my colleague, James Roots, executive director of the Canadian Association of the Deaf. The CAD-ASD is a national non-for-profit organization that promotes accessibility for deaf people who uses American Sign Language and ASL and Langue Distincte Québécois LSQ. CAD and ASC works with the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance, FALA, to advise and improve Bill C-81 Accessible Act. The Bill C-81 is very important for persons with disabilities and deaf persons, as it would lead to an improvement in their quality of life. The Honourable Carla Qualtrough, Minister of Public Services, Procurement and Accessibility, has stated that 5,000 new jobs will be created for people with disabilities and deaf, blind, and hard of hearing persons in Canada. We commend the Government of Canada for introducing Bill C-81, which is the right step towards becoming an accessible Canada. CAD-ASC and the deaf community want Bill C-81 to be improved and become law. We would like to recommend the recognition of ASL LSQ as official languages of deaf people in Canada, because it does actually provide full accessibility to information and communication and services. It will make a huge difference for deaf Canadians, and you will be in compliance with the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, that Canada ratified in March of 2010, which has 5 different articles that mention the specific rights of sign languages. Currently, there are 45 countries that have recognized their national sign languages by their governments: Ireland, Greece, Scotland, Italy, Mexico, New Zealand. Canada is not on this list. Such recognition in Canada ensures that removal of barriers and ensuring equal access, which is an important step towards becoming an inclusive, accessible Canada. As we integrate both English and French societies, this means deaf people in Canada will finally have equal access to federal government services. Examples would be production of accessible videos on federal government websites, provision of ASL LSQ video interpreting at federal government services, For example, Service Canada, if you're, would be one example. Provision of picture-in-picture ASL LSQ interpretation services through broadcast television and digital communication, such as federal leadership debates or emergency alert announcements, and many other kind of accessibility services. Let's imagine for a moment how Bill C-81 will improve the lives for deaf people in Canada. A deaf person is at the Ottawa International Airport, and their seat needs to be reassigned due to an overbooking by the airline. The deaf person approaches the airline customer service representative at the gate, and they connect by video interpreting services. Immediately, they are able to communicate by video in ASL or LSQ through a video interpreter to resolve the overbooking issue and reduce stress and confusion. A second example would be a deaf person is watching federal political leader debate with sign language interpretation in English, and the debates for ASL interpreters and French debates for LSQ interpreters, picture-in-picture, on screen, and closed captioning in English and in French as well too. So we as deaf people can participate and be privy to what is happening during the debate and to have a good understanding of the different platforms that the candidates have. Therefore, we believe that amendments are needed for this Bill C-81 to achieve its stated purpose. Today, we highlight several recommendations. One, we recommend Bill C-81 include an amendment that will recognize ASL and LSQ as official languages of deaf people in Canada. This will allow Canada to join other countries which have already recognized their national accessibility legislation with the recognition of their national sign languages, following the requirements of the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Secondly, timelines are essential for ensuring that Bill C-81 will advance accessibility. We recommend dates and timelines up to 5 years for development and implementation of accessibility standards and regulations for each targeted area. Thirdly, CAD, ASC, agree with the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance, FALA, recommendation to add communication as 6 targeted barriers areas that must be expanded. This change will bring focus to barriers, accommodations, and supports for people with communication disabilities as well as for people who are deaf. Fourthly, Bill C-81 does not designate a single point of access to oversee the complaints process. We recommend standardization of process for timely resolution of complaints and a single point of access that supports deaf people and people with disabilities who present complaints. Which will avoid unnecessary barriers, delays, and inefficiencies to the process. To avoid these problems, the Accessibility Commissioner should receive all complaints about violations of accessibility standards. Number 5, we recommend that financial support must be available to assist with legal fees of individual complaints. 6, we recommend that the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization, CASDO, that will include a minimum of 2/3 of deaf people and people with disabilities on its board, staff, executives, and committees. 7, we recommend that any entity that receives funding from the federal government of Canada to comply with federal accessibility standards and regulations. 8, we recommend that Bill C-81 must be provided with sufficient and permanent funding to enable people with disabilities and organizations of people with disabilities, including deaf people, to achieve significant advances in accessibility and inclusion in all federal jurisdictions. 9, We recommend that the legislation must mandate the use of comprehensive annual performance reports conducted by the Chief Accessibility Officer based on outcomes achieved. And our final recommendation, we recommend that legislation will create, develop, and support programs that improve the employment and prospects of people with disabilities and deaf people in Canada. Our materials include several more recommendations in relation to other important issues that will address accessibility issues, which is an inclusive, accessible Canada that includes 3.5 million deaf, blind, and hard of hearing Canadians to ensure that they have equal rights to participate in Canadian society. It will allow Canada to better meet the human rights obligations under the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disability. We would be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And now for the next 7 minutes from from Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, Mr. David Arnott, Chief Commissioner, coming to us via video conference. Can you hear me okay, sir?
I can, thanks.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Well, it's my sincere honor and pleasure to appear before this esteemed committee this morning. Thank you, Chair, Mr. May, for giving me the opportunity to make this presentation. The Conference Board of Canada estimates that by the year 2036, 1 in 5 Canadians will have a disability. This is not surprising considering our demographics are changing. We're all getting older. The boomers cohort, of which I'm a member, is getting older. They have expectations, they have wealth, they're vocal, and they need and expect accessibility. Human rights commissions are at the front lines of dealing with the business impact, social impact, and individual impact of not accommodating people with disabilities. Last year, more than 57% of the complaints that came to the Human Rights Commission in Saskatchewan were disability related. And fully 1/3 of those complaints were disability in the area of employment. In 2015, a study conducted by the Canadian Human Rights Commission in collaboration with the Canadian Association of Statutory Human Rights Agency, CASHRA, representing all the human rights commissions in Canada, found a remarkable consistency with this negative statistic. Almost half of all human rights complaints in Canada in these jurisdictions were disability related between the years 2009 and 2013. Canadians with disability experience systemic discrimination and inconsistency in the built environment, employment, and access to services within and across all jurisdictions. Canadians with disabilities deserve a systemic response to systemic discrimination, and that response must be common, consistent, and continuous. And in my view, it must use restorative principles, restorative justice principles, to create a restored relationship in a positive way. If I draw a criticism of Bill C-81, and it's really a reminder more than a criticism, and that is this, that we must remind ourselves of the intersectionality facing individuals with disabilities, particularly, number one, women with disabilities are disproportionately impacted, children with disabilities are disproportionately impacted, and Indigenous people in this country with disabilities are disproportionately impacted. I'm mindful that governments are working towards supporting the groups I've just identified, but I think leadership is required, and existing good governance through legislation enables the federal government to take up that leadership role. It's very necessary in this country. The government, the minister, and the legislation have a capacity, in my opinion, to leverage change through strategic use of grants and with the sharing of best practices at, for instance, a federal, provincial, territorial table in the future. In the present, Bill C-81 is significant because, firstly, it is a first strong effort to provide consistency to the rubric of accessibility in our country. It is significant because there is a strong business case for greater accessibility. It is significant because There is a moral as well as a demographic urgency for doing so, and it is significant because people with disabilities are the largest minority group in Canada that anyone can join, and they are deserving of consideration. Let me take you through these points. First, let us consider the need for a consistent rubric for accessibility. Our country has a national building code. We have CSA standards, which set out minimum standards for accessibility, and some provinces and many municipalities have moved well beyond those standards. All provinces have human rights codes or acts, and they are considered quasi-constitutional, meaning that there's a paramountcy to that legislation. That legislation in each province and territory trumps or is paramount to any other legislation, meaning that all acts must comply with the Human Rights Code. The courts have stated that building codes and human rights codes are in many cases complementary. They work together to provide accessibility. Because they are quasi-constitutional, and this I think is very important, human rights codes trump building codes. So putting people first before systems, as human rights codes do, make very good sense. And I say this to emphasize this point, that connecting the proposed legislation, Bill C-81, to the Canadian Human Rights Act makes sense at this point. Number one, it puts people first and before some significant, complex, and powerful systems. And secondly, the bill represents a significant step in our country's evolution concerning disability rights. I use the word evolution on purpose because positive change comes in increments. And I believe we can learn in Canada from the American experience in this regard. Chai Feldblum, one of the architects of the Americans with Disability Act, told me that she and others faced pushback and uncertainty at the time that legislation came into force in the United States. What we can learn from that is this. One, there's likely to be some controversy with this introduction, and secondly, there's likely to be litigation, but frankly, that's to be embraced. Up front, Bill C-81 contemplates the need to resolve competing interests in a considerate way. Human rights commissions in Canada deal with balancing those interests on a daily basis. It's nothing to fear. It's part of our business, and I think it's done very well. When I was given the opportunity to comment on the path forward during the consultation process, I suggested that the Accessibility Commissioner should have a statutory right to intervene in matters that involve accessibility issues that are not before the Accessibility Commissioner or the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. In other words, they are before other administrative tribunals that have jurisdiction on accessibility issues. And by intervention, I mean that the Accessibility Commissioner should have the right to bring evidence and to bring legal argument at those other places, those other administrative tribunals. I also suggested that the Accessibility Commissioner should have a statutory right to launch a systemic complaint in matters that involve accessibility issues. That is an efficient way to resolve disability issues, in my opinion, because it provides resolution for a large cohort of individuals as opposed to a one-off situation. So it provides an opportunity, for example, to deal with issues for all Canadians who are blind or partially sighted and to all Canadians who are deaf or hard of hearing. What it would bring is a certainty, a consistency, and a uniformity to all rulings with respect to accessibility with administrative tribunals in the federal context. So I reflect for a moment on the consultation process that was used to inform Bill C-81, and I think it's worth remembering that the process excited the imaginations of people with disabilities in this country and raised expectations and dealt with a sea of frustration and emotions and marginalization that people with disabilities have had in this country for over 50 years or longer. And it also excited the imaginations of those who advocate on behalf of people with disabilities. There was a sense that things could change, that things would change. And this represented an incredible opportunity to make long-needed change and to have much needed recognition. In recognizing that Bill C-81 has fundamental application to significant areas of life for people with disabilities, and thinking about the federal jurisdiction in transportation, communications, and banking, we must also recognize that there is a strong business case for accessibility. The Conference Board of Canada suggests that getting accessibility correct in the workplace could have a positive $16.8 billion impact to the Canadian economy. In 2013, the Panel on Labor Market Opportunities for Persons with Disability reported that despite an aging population, a looming skill shortage, this significant talent pool, persons with disability, is being overlooked. Now let's look at the intersection of the business case and the moral imperative. Bill C-81 is proposing a framework from which to discuss disability and accessibility. It recognizes the need to create and apply standards to deal with a social reality. At the same time, it implies a business cost. Buildings, spaces, and services require resources. Yet it implies the needs of an often unconsidered yet growing cohort need to be given top priority. The creation of a best practice standards will inform the practices in all jurisdictions. In my experience in accommodating disability, human rights commissions and the courts aim to resolve inaccessibility based on what is reasonable and based on what is the best practice. Fundamentally, what I'm saying is this: it will be difficult to ignore the existence of well-reasoned research and well-reasoned arguments on accessibility standards, particularly when those standards have application throughout Canada. I believe that human rights commissions, labor standards, and health and safety organizations will regard Bill C-81 and the work of the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization and the work of the Accessibility Commissioner as giving significant guidance to the work that those agencies are currently doing on the ground, frontline in provinces and territories. So there's a significant political influence and economic influence that will be available through the wise actions of the incumbent Accessibility Commissioner. It has been said that disability is the last bastion of prejudice, the last bastion of prejudice. Bill C-81 offers a substantial support against that notion. It affirms and it supplies the teeth that people with disabilities deserve equal moral consideration. Bill C-81 in part legislates the equal moral consideration contemplated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Article 9 of the CRPD requires Canada to identify and eliminate obstacles and barriers for persons with disability. Bill C-81 meets in part the obligation of these commitments, and it amplifies the need for equality, fairness, equity, and the respect for human dignity that exists in all human rights acts and codes in this country. Fundamentally, accessibility is crucial to the inclusion of citizens with disabilities in the social, cultural, and economic life of our country. Increasing accessibility in buildings, in businesses, and in the public and community spaces we all use makes good sense from a business perspective, and it is a best practice for inclusion of people with disabilities, inclusion so that all people in Canada are able to participate to the fullest extent in the life of Canada. We need a barrier-free Canada. We need legislation to ensure a barrier-free Canada, to eliminate these barriers that face people with disabilities currently. I believe the legislation is a significant, bold step for a better future for Canadians with disabilities. Thank you for allowing me to make this presentation to you this morning. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, sir. We are going to get started right away with questions. Just a reminder to my colleagues, we do have a very hard stop at 10 o'clock as we need to be in our seats shortly thereafter. First up, MP Diop.
Thank you, and thanks to the both of you for coming here to try to shed some light on something. Now, as an able-bodied person, I'm always interested in real-life examples of what specific issues or day-to-day challenges people with disabilities have, because that's what we want to get to with all the bureaucratic talk and talk about, it's very legalese sounding. But I'm wondering if, starting with Mr. Folino, you could describe some of the challenges that people with visual impairment and deaf impairment as well face day to day, and how we can, specific examples so that the average person who does not suffer impairment can better understand.
Certainly. Thank you for your question. On a day-to-day basis, we face many barriers and challenges. Sign language interpreting services are not often readily available, for example, for job interviews or various other services that we're trying to access. And often, sometimes, businesses or government departments are denying services or are unaware that they are to provide sign language interpreters and that it is their right to get sign language interpreters. For example, a deaf person may want to go to a concert, for example, and they've requested for an ASL or an LSQ interpreter, and they've been denied. And so often we're fighting to remove those barriers, and that's frustrating for other deaf people. Another example, a deaf person may go to the CRTC hearings, the proceedings, and sometimes they don't provide interpreters for a public hearing. But I may want to attend as a citizen of Canada and access what is being said, just like my other colleagues or friends or peers that are not deaf can attend these public hearings for the entire week and see. I, on the other hand, have been told that I have to rely on transcripts. That's not equal participants in terms of accessing that information. Another example is when I'm traveling, I may not be aware that a gate has changed or there's a delay in a flight. There's no LED system, so I may miss my flight. And that causes more stress on a deaf individual. I can share many other examples. Jim, do you have any? Yes, for example, just recently, Monday, I went to vote. And there were 4 people talking to me and blocking my way. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm deaf. I don't understand. They continued to talk to me. And I said, again, I'm sorry, I'm deaf. So I gave them my card and showed them my name. And they, again, spoke to me and pointed to the left. I still didn't know what they were saying. And I went to the area with the ballot, but I wasn't sure which area was mine, or to get my ballot, rather. And they pointed to one table, and I said, well, there's no one sitting there. And they said, oh, yeah. And again, their mouth moved. I couldn't understand. And then I had to stand in front of a table. There was no person there, but I was waiting, and I thought, am I in the right place? I have no idea. Is this where I might get my ballot? And then finally somebody appeared, and I asked for my ballot again and again. They were moving their mouths, talking, and I said, I don't understand, I'm deaf. And that whole experience for me was quite frustrating. And I looked like a fool. If you don't mind, Frank, here, I would like to add one more. If there's an emergency alert or an attack or a tornado or a hurricane, we have to be prepared to evacuate, and we need emergency preparedness mechanisms that are accessible to us. And so at the federal level, when you're providing announcements, you should have sign language interpreters available. This is common practice in UK, in France, in Australia, and the United States. We are so behind. If you have an interpreter for any public announcement, then you're reaching our audience in ASL and LSQ, and they know that they need to be prepared in order to evacuate or avoid a certain catastrophe. ASL LSQ, if it's recognized as a language for deaf people, that will enable accessibility to communication and meet our needs across Canada.
Those are great examples. I think that's really useful, and I thank you both for providing those. Sure. Mr. Foligno, you talked about everyone who receives federal funding must comply with accessibility legislation. Can you elaborate briefly on that concept?
Certainly. I could start, and then Mr. Roots can add. Any funding that's provided, they stay stagnant. They don't follow the Accessibility Act. So if they want to remove barriers, for instance, and you allot any funding within that procurement process, they need to prove that they're ensuring that things are being accessible. So you need to follow up, ensure that it's regulated, so there is that change. There should be an annual report from the commissioner measuring those changes and see where there are gaps and fill in on those gaps and invest in those areas to ensure that everything is accessible. So to meet those needs. So that's the reason that we need those timelines in place. Jim, for example, if you give public funds to CBC, for example, it means that CBC needs to comply and they need to be accessible. So their content, as an employer or any content that they provide has to be accessible. So with broadcasters on TV as well, it needs to be accessible. There's captioning, and I have access. But then on the website, cbc.ca, same programming doesn't have captioning. And so there's a barrier there. And it's the same program. And there's a loophole. So we would like to see Bill C-81 resolve those and close those gaps and barriers.
Thank you very much. Remove those barriers. MP Long, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to our witnesses. The testimony continues to be very, very informative. And certainly, Mr. Roots and Mr. Foligno, I'm so sorry for the challenges, especially on the voting challenges you faced this week. That's not acceptable. And our hope is that Bill C-81 will go a long ways to removing and tearing down those barriers and opening up your worlds. Mr. Arnott, thanks for your testimony, and my first question is to you. The underlying theme from the comments we have heard about timelines and reporting in this study thus far seems to be one of concern regarding an insufficient accountability mechanisms. Contrary to an assertion made during the previous session, the Accessibility Commissioner is required to report to Parliament by submitting an annual report to the Minister, who is then required to table that report in Parliament. In addition, Sections 131 and 132 also require independent reviews of this legislation after the first 5 years for 131 and every 10 years thereafter for 132. Mr. Arnott, based on your experience in Saskatchewan, are these accountability mechanisms adequate? And can you also suggest ways they could be improved? Thank you. You may be on mute.
No.
Okay.
Focusing on the role of the Accessibility Commissioner, I believe that person could interpret their role in a very significant way, which would continue to educate all Canadians. The mechanism of reporting to Parliament could be accelerated if that person was an independent officer of Parliament. That's something that we suggested. It's not going to be part of this act, but I believe that role and those timelines will be adequate. We can learn from them. It's really about the uptake and the support from the community, from the stakeholders that is taken once those reports are made, and making sure that all Canadians have access to the reports, whether it's through social media or other means. So it's, in my opinion, the timelines may be a good start. We'll be informed whether they're adequate or not by the success of the role of the Accessibility Commissioner. But fundamentally, the focus should be on that commissioner making all Canadians aware of these issues, because the majority of Canadians, I believe, would like to support the inclusiveness for all persons with disability. But there are many unintended consequences, and we see that in the built environment and the to-be-built environment. Big issues on transportation, provincially and municipally, which need to be addressed, because that transportation is a barrier for a person, whether it's they need employment, to get to employment, healthcare, education, etc. So I want to reiterate a point that was made earlier on voting. Voting municipally and provincially is a huge issue, and the barriers are significant, and they haven't been cured. So again, we need a systemic response to those.
Just I want to jump in on the voting, Mr. Arnott.
Yes.
I mean, Mr. Root's testimony was compelling. You could feel the frustration. I witnessed something very similar in my riding of St. John Ross a few weeks back with respect to a similar situation. So what can we do to improve that?
I think that can be accommodated in many ways. People with disabilities, visual or hearing, there's no undue hardship. There's no argument that works for the discrimination that occurs to Canadians with disabilities trying to exercise such a fundamental right. It's a big issue in Saskatchewan, municipally and provincially. It continues to be so. We have some litigation in Saskatchewan that's dealing with those very issues. But from speaking to the disability community, it's very clear that those impediments still exist, and the excuses that are put forward are not adequate, because fundamentally the resources are available to accommodate those that have disabilities and are impaired in their ability to vote, in my opinion.
Thank you for that. Mr. Arnott, a number of our witnesses on both this and the previous panels talked about the language in the bill, thought it could be more prescriptive rather than simply enabling. Can you point to some examples of where and how we can amend the bill to address those concerns?
Well, quite frankly, I wouldn't be able to do that now. I'd have to address that in a writing to you later.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Foligno, I want to say it was great to meet you in my office. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I think we had a great conversation, and one of the topics we talked about was the composition of the board, CASDO, and how many people with disabilities should be on that board. I think we talked about the 50+1, and then you proposed 2/3, 70%. I know Ms. Jewel Smith was in earlier and talked about, well, really, I wanted 100%. We said 70% to you. So can you and Mr. Roots maybe elaborate on how important it is, and in particular, maybe Section 23(2), how that could maybe be reworded to...
You're way over, I'm afraid, so maybe we can come back to that question if you could share. Sorry. I apologize. We're going to have to move on to MP Hardcastle, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Arnott, I'd like to hear you expand a little bit on your thoughts with regards to the Accessibility Commissioner. You stated earlier that this commissioner should have rights to intervene, should have statutory rights to intervene on other bodies in decision making. We've also heard concerns about the splintering of enforcement on different entities, and perhaps the accessibility commissioner should have the mandate for all enforcement. I just wondered what if you can expand on your mindset in talking about that intervention rate that you think is important. Is that based on observations and past experience?
Yes, it is. I think there are a number of, in the Saskatchewan context, there's a number of organizations that can rule or have input into human rights issues, which leads to an inconsistency and a non-uniformity. So what I was suggesting is that the Accessibility Commissioner should have a statutory base to make representations not only to the Human Rights Tribunal, but more importantly to the CRTC and the Canadian Transportation Agency and any other agency that's dealing with accommodation issues. Why? Because if they're allowed to intervene and call evidence and then make legal argument, there's a greater opportunity or chance to have a certainty, a consistency, and a uniformity at very early stages, rather than to rely on appeal mechanisms to try to cure that, which are inherently costly and time-consuming. The best way to do it is at the initial hearing, and that occurs in various administrative tribunals in the federal regime, but certainly the CRTC and the Canadian Transportation Agency come foremost. So the way to do that is to allow that Accessibility Commissioner to intervene. And an intervention would mean the ability to call evidence and the ability to make legal argument. So it's really about providing a uniformity without having a splintering and competing tribunals or administrative tribunals with a different view. So the fastest way to get to consistency is to let someone like the Accessibility Commissioner to intervene at the very earliest instance to provide that uniformity.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, have I got a minute or two?
Almost three.
Okay. Maybe I can ask Mr. Foligno and Mr. Roots. We're talking about this idea of being able to make complaints, and you heard Mr. Arnott talking about uniformity. Can you talk about how you think we should be improving this bill on how it is fragmented right now, the way it appears right now? There are different departments, different entities, let's say, for making complaints, and there are even exemptions that can be made with no appeal process. Do you have some observations for us to point out?
Certainly. We need to resolve issues efficiently and quickly. We don't want any delays. We don't want deaf persons or people with disabilities unsure of where they should go. There should be one door, one entry point, one person to collect all complaints. The commissioner officer should be responsible to ensure that complaints are dealt with in a timely manner and are given to the right area. The bill isn't clear about the complaint process currently. So if there's a complaint about an accessibility standard, but what about a complaint against a group? For example, CRTC. They haven't provided ASL/LSQ interpreters, for instance, in their hearings. Does that include, do we enter that same entry point? Do we complain to the accessibility officer and then they ensure that it's dealt with timely? And also we need to make sure that these complaints can be received in our native language, in ASL and LSQ. So I need to be able to express my complaint in sign language, send it by video in my language instead of written English or French. In Europe, they're already advanced. They have set up that system. It would be nice if we could follow that example, follow suit. Jim Roots here. Bill C-81 is currently a bit confusing in terms of where do these complaints actually go. Some complaints may go directly to CRTC or directly to the Canadian Human Rights Commission or CTA, or then fourthly to the Accessibility Commissioner Officer. And it seems, maybe I'm wrong, they make a distinction between the accessibility complaint and a discriminative complaint. How is the accessibility complaint not discriminative? I don't understand that at all.
Thank you. MP Sangha, please. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. MP Long, please.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you, certainly Mr. Foligno and Mr. Roots, for your passion, your leadership, and your advocacy on behalf of people with disabilities. It's truly impressive and obviously much needed. So, Mr. Foligno and Mr. Roots, I want to go back to you with respect to the composition of the board. We talked in my office about 70%. Again, as I said, Ms. Jules Smith was talking about really maybe 100%. Can you give us your thoughts as to how that board should be stocked, if you will? And number two, if there's amendments to 23.2, potentially different wording to make sure that people with disabilities are represented, and potentially maybe people with disabilities in every disability group has representation in some way. So can you just elaborate, Mr. Foligno, Mr. Roots, on your thoughts? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your question.
Of course.
Mr. Long. We strongly recommend that there's a minimum of 2/3 representation of people with disabilities and deaf persons representing the group, because they have lived experience. They are the experts, and they know what the barriers are and can help consult in terms of developing those standards to ensure that we have a barrier-free Canada. So we need that diversity on the board, and we need a minimum of 2/3. Jules said 100%, yes, and would maybe go down to 70%. But that's how we can meet the needs and ensure that we have a barrier-free Canada.
Mr. Roots?
Jules and I both strongly believe that the board should be 100% representation of the experts, but other organizations have convinced us to negotiate and agree to 2/3. It is important because other organizations start with a request for 50% plus one, and we strongly opposed that suggestion. We have lots of experience with various other boards and organizations and committees and staff who decide 50% plus one is good enough. But what happens is that the disabled people then get further marginalized and pushed away, and the non-disabled people take over and control and then change the regulations or the rules to 50-50. Which means that they can be outvoted, and they've lost their power and they've lost their authority. We've seen that many times, time and time again. I've seen it happen within the disabled organizations themselves. They have a mixed board of 48% non-disabled and 52% disabled, and they never advance their issues, and then eventually get voted out. If it's 70%, it won't be so easy to beat us.
Thank you. Mr. Arnott, do you have any thing you want to contribute with respect to the composition of the CASTO board, please?
I would just say that the default position would be to make sure that you're hearing and ensuring the lived experience is understood. As pointed out by one of the committee members earlier, it's the persons without disabilities that really don't understand fully the impediments and barriers put before. So, that's the default position, and I certainly would have no hesitation in saying a 2/3 would make a reasonable sense, as we've heard earlier. It's really ensuring that those on that board setting those standards or overseeing that would fully understand the lived experience. The best way you can do that, it's up to your committee to make the recommendation. Working with people with disabilities, the frustration that they feel on a daily basis because of the non-understanding, the sea of ignorance that exists in Canada about these issues, is to be addressed in a way that's the most effective you can possibly do. And, the maximum would be my short answer.
Thank you for that. Mr. Foligno, I want to discuss with you, sometimes I get concerned when I hear from businesses in my riding, stakeholders in my riding, sometimes some of my conservative friends that, there's too high a cost of doing this, too high a cost of moving forward. I'd like to argue that there's a cost of not doing that. I mean, I can speak at length about a shopping mall that opened up better access to people with disabilities, and their businesses thrived on it because there's a major market there. So, Mr. Foligno, can you talk to me and just discuss that there shouldn't be a cost to breaking down barriers and opening up access?
I believe, I understand there's a cost in terms of access, but there are strategies or ways to address that. For example, if you want to support removing barriers in Canada, there are tax credit incentives for businesses if they are fully accessible. And so if you promote it in that vein, then we are investing in our Canadians and in Canada. So there are strategies. So if you economically invest to make sure that change or ensure that change happens, everyone will benefit from that. In Europe, they have a great tax incentive for accessibility to support that economy to address those change and move those changes forward. Cost should not be a concern. There are ways to address it. Another example is with public and private organizations and government sectors working together, P3, and investing together in removing these barriers. There are lots of ways, and we should not be afraid.
Thank you. As earlier stated, we have a very hard deadline today, so I'm afraid we have to wrap up. Thank you very much for everybody for being here. Thank you to the committee. We will adjourn.